Hello.
And welcome to our Digital Innovation in Mental Health 2024 talk, Fake It Till You Make It. And this is a discussion of how to conquer imposter syndrome. My name's Nicholas Knapp. I'm a senior member of the IEEE. I'm a founder of a small consulting firm. I'm a steering committee member for several different initiatives, and I chair a working group looking at digital privacy. Currently working on a building efficiency platform that improves commercial buildings and small manufacturers.
And I'm Alex Napp-Vega. I'm currently an undergraduate at the University of Hull studying politics and international relations. I'm a big advocate for equal rights, and my main focus at the moment is the intersection of technology and policy.
So to be very clear up front, we are absolutely not in any way mental health professionals.
Quite frankly, the closest any of us get is a high school psychology class, just so you understand how truly unqualified we are.
So caveat emptor, buyer beware. And we thought we would start by just ripping off the proverbial Band-Aid and giving a couple of very personal examples of when each of us really struggled with severe imposter syndrome. So, Alex, I'll let you go first.
So, for me, I'm actually the recipient of a semi-prestigious scholarship at my university, and because of that, I and some other scholarship recipients were invited to this big scholarship dinner type event in December as a celebration of all the hard work we all did to get the scholarships in the first place.
And this is an authentic AI recreation of the event with you in the left-hand corner of the screen, is it not?
Which, quite frankly, me in the left-hand corner is potentially the most authentic part of the whole thing. But anyways, so to sort of start off why this felt like it was doomed to fail, the same day of the scholarship dinner, I had rehearsal for the musical that I was in at the time, and I had no time to go home and change, so I had just essentially thrown a kind of nice looking jumper over my costume and had called that good. Meanwhile, everyone else there was in at least business casual, while I was there in my jeans and my trainers.
And for the benefit of the audience, your character was Leaf Coneybear from the Putnam Spelling Bee musical. What were a couple of Leaf's primary attributes, just so people understand?
Well, so I would really like to state that I did the utmost to cover this up, but I was wearing a very intense tie-dye shirt and my jeans. I was wearing socks with sandals, I believe, and
Which you did change before.
I did change that before, yes. Least of all because it was quite cold, with it being December. And then, in addition to all of those interesting stylistic choices, he also wears a cape, which, of course, I had left behind because it belongs in the prop cupboard. But
not a fashion icon, reasonably safe to say that.
No, definitely not. And then, I got there, I saw everyone else dressed nice, feeling kind of out of place. And then it got worse, because almost everyone there was a post-grad. In the entire event that lasted for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I met only one other undergrad. Everyone else was post-grad. Everyone else had fancy credentials. Quite a few of the people there had gotten Pell Grants or other very well-known prestigious scholarships. I was also the only social science major there, while there were definitely some people studying economics at the post-grad level. If the other social science people were more respected, shall we say. There's more of a traditional understanding of career trajectory behind them.
Yeah, unfortunately, nobody said anything about that to you, right?
No, not fortunately. Quite soon within getting there, I started talking to this older woman that was a part of administration, and she asked me what I was studying. I said politics and international relations, and she frowned at me and went, "Oh, well, there aren't very many jobs doing that. What are you gonna do?" Um, which is almost word for word what she said. She was quite blunt about the whole situation.
So, but apart from that, anything that made you uncomfortable?
Well, in addition to this, again, because it was a sort of nicer event, they had the sort of waiters walking around with the trays of fancy hors d'oeuvres, of which I recognized approximately nothing. But you know, all of that put together leaves you in a pretty interesting place.
And so overall, how did it go?
Once I sort of got over it, essentially, it was completely fine. I basically played it up in my head that I wasn't supposed to be there, and then it was completely fine. I had a good chat with the other undergrad that was there. I had a longer and interesting conversation with one of the more senior members of administration at the university, and it went really well.
Excellent.
And I survived, so I'll take that.
So, for me, I mean, you would think at my age I would have gotten past imposter syndrome. As a middle-aged white guy, I'm almost a poster child for not supposed to have it. But I was giving a presentation on Capitol Hill. And there were a lot of issues with that. First of all, I am not a US citizen and I have never voted in the US because of that. So immediately feeling very out of place. Second of all, this presentation was not my field of expertise. This was a project that I got pulled into as a favor for a friend. And whilst I could probably give an okay overview at a high level, there's no depth there for me. It's not my topic area.
But there weren't any other issues, were there?
Well, yes, because of the nature of the presentation, I had a laundry list of do's and don'ts, things I could and couldn't say. And usually, as you probably can tell, I give fairly freewheeling presentations where I stay on topic, but I do express my personal opinions, which were pretty explicitly and clearly forbidden in this case. And also, last but not least, I had no idea who the audience was going to be. It could have been literally, political minions that didn't carry much weight, all the way through to senators and senior lobbyists and heads of various major federal agencies. So, yeah, it was somewhere between intimidating and terrifying. And I've given a lot of presentations in my life.
But apart from that, how'd it go?
Yeah, well, you know what? I survived, and people actually seemed to appreciate that I didn't get into the weeds. So yeah, all in all, it turned out okay. And of course, the other prime example we have is this presentation at Digital Innovation in Mental Health. We have presented here before, but when we looked at the topic list this year, and we saw imposter syndrome on it, we immediately looked at each other and basically said, I don't think we're qualified to present on that.
Which, if that's not a ringing endorsement, I don't know what
exactly.
is.
So we emailed Becky and she agreed, and here we are. And how did this go?
You tell us.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully this is helpful. So we have come up with a working theory around imposter syndrome, and we hope it's helpful. But of course, we invented this, we've made this up, so it might be wrong. But one of the principles is what we call the perception imposter paradox.
Which, the general idea is that the more perceptive and situationally aware you are, the greater your odds of imposter syndrome. And conversely, the less perceptive and situationally aware you are, the lower your odds of imposter syndrome.
And like any good consultants, we have come up with a nifty little quad chart. So you've got, on the horizontal axis, you've got self-awareness going from low to high. And on the vertical axis, you've got situational awareness also going from low to high.
So in our first quadrant, with high situational awareness and high self-awareness, we have imposter syndrome. If this was a map, you are here, essentially. You're aware of your own abilities and you're aware of whatever situation you found yourself in, and that makes you highly cognizant of the fact that you might not be the best person to present, or that maybe you shouldn't be here.
Yep, or lead the conversation, right? So this is classic imposter syndrome territory. Conversely, if you have low situational awareness and low self-awareness, you may think you're incredibly competent and you got this, and that is the zone of delusional competence that we all want to avoid.
Then, if you have low situational awareness but high self-awareness, this is what we've elected to call the social chameleon. You're quite aware of everything else going on around you, and you're
really keen to blend in, I think, right? That's really what this is about, right? This is the person that flip-flops with whatever direction the event, the meeting, the Zoom call is taking. The one that, is basically like a heat-seeking missile for the majority opinion and goes right along with it very publicly. And then, of course, we have one last quadrant, which we've called the oblivious introspector.
This is, of course, low self-awareness and high situational awareness. So, you're quite aware of everything going on internally with you, but not necessarily aware of the situation as a whole. This is the kind of person that thinks of something in a meeting and just blurts it out with no regard to whether or not it's actually useful or appropriate for the point in the meeting.
Yeah, and it may well be, right? But because of the way they deliver it, it typically gets ignored. So as you think about these 4 quadrants, broadly speaking, the greater the confidence, or the way the confidence increases, is from the top right to the bottom left. So, the people that are deluded into believing that they're terribly competent when they really aren't, have incredible, staggering levels of confidence. So we thought it would be good to put some exemplars together so that you know exactly what we're talking about. And originally we were going to use real people, but we thought that might get a little tricky. So instead we've gone with different fictional and fantasy characters. So let's start with the top right, the high level of imposter syndrome.
So for this, we've chosen Miles Morales. And for anyone not familiar with the current Spider-Man franchise, he essentially falls into being Spider-Man completely by accident. He feels incredibly unqualified and that he's not a good Spider-Man, despite the fact that he has plenty of unique abilities that the other Spider-Men don't have. He's got quite a lot to bring to the table, but he feels very nervous about his position because he's new and he hasn't quite gotten the confidence yet.
And it's fair to say that he has some unique skills, right? But as you can see, if you look closely at this image, he's actually wearing a costume Spider-Man from a Halloween store with a little price tag on it. So yeah, he has absolute spades of serious imposter syndrome.
Then, in our area of delusional competence, we have SpongeBob. Specifically, the episode where SpongeBob decides to take his driving test. For those unfamiliar with the episode, SpongeBob is incredibly convinced that he is a great driver and that he will pass his test. However, it turns out that he is a truly terrible driver, and he essentially fails the entire test and drives so poorly that his driving instructor quits and has to take some serious time off for her mental health.
So in our next quadrant, we have the social chameleon, and we chose Iago from Disney's Aladdin.
As opposed to Iago from Othello, just because Iago from Othello is a little less recognizable to anyone that's not an English nerd, aka me.
And, Iago basically tells people what they want to hear. He's very good at reading what the genie wants, going with that, reading what other characters want, going with that. So he is the epitome of our social chameleon. Which brings us to the last quadrant of oblivious introspectors. And for that, we picked Candace from Phineas and Ferb.
So for anyone unfamiliar, she's usually quite invested in herself and her own sort of plot in whatever episode's going down, and she may occasionally completely accidentally contribute, positively or negatively, but for the most part, she's quite focused on herself rather than anything else.
Exactly. So, here's our thesis, our next step, if you will, in this little presentation.
Let's say our idea here is that if you can bolster your confidence, you can reduce imposter syndrome without falling into delusional competence. The theory here is that your imposter syndrome is a sort of emergency brake, almost, to stop you from delusional competence.
And that, of course, means that confidence is key. But that's a little obvious, right? That's a little like, well, duh, right? If I was more confident, maybe I wouldn't have imposter syndrome.
But what is confidence? We've decided that confidence is a combination of things you can control and things you cannot, which, again, kind of a, well, duh situation. So what do we mean by that?
Yeah, and so we've built up what we think is a reasonable framework for confidence. And it's based on 4 foundational pillars: knowledge, rapport and tone, the physical environment, and timing. So let us walk you through this. And as we're going through this, think of it like a checklist. These are all things that if you know a little bit more about them before you head into your event, whatever it is, odds are good that you can reduce your level of imposter syndrome by increasing your confidence. So, for example, under knowledge, right, there's the general area. Is this a general area you are comfortable talking about? And that's something you can control because, say you're in a meeting and you get called on and you don't know, don't understand, or don't have an opinion genuinely, it's okay to say that. That's fine. And then second of all, there's specific expertise, right? Can you get into the weeds on this topic? And again, you may have some self-doubt about your level of specific expertise, but again, you can control how much of that you have to get into.
Then there's the understanding of your own skills. Do you have a realistic understanding of where your expertise starts and ends?
And of course, going along with that is general self-awareness. Again, the people that are delusionally competent or delusional about their competence generally have very low self-awareness. And so as someone that suffers with imposter syndrome, you're kind of unlikely to fall into that particular hole. Now, when it comes to rapport and tone, right, who is the audience? Who are you going to be surrounded by? And this is something you can control a little bit because you can ask about it ahead of time, whatever the event is, right?
Then it's known people. Is there anyone there that you actually know? I mean, it's quite self-explanatory.
Yeah, exactly. Simple one to inquire about and to fix, right? If there is nobody that you know there, at least you know that ahead of time so you can be prepared for it.
There's also the sort of idea of similar people. If you are a minority, for example, and you're the only black person in a room full of white people, or the only visibly trans person in a room full of cisgender people, you're gonna feel kind of uncomfortable. It's not gonna be a great time for you. But you can kind of mitigate that. As with known people, you can ask ahead of time what the crowd's gonna look like, or if you're disabled, if there are gonna be any accommodations.
Exactly. And of course, there's the audience response. I was talking to somebody who I consider extremely competent in their field, and they were talking about a meeting they'd been in where a topic came up that they knew very well. It was squarely in their lane. They answered it and gave what they felt at the time was a good answer. And somebody that was in the delusional competence quadrant piped up and said, "Oh, no, I don't think that's right." And immediately, even though they knew that person was wrong, their confidence took a huge knock and they basically didn't say much else for the rest of the meeting. So again, calling that out so you can kind of emotionally prepare yourself to occasionally run into that.
And then there's audience expectation. What does the audience think is going to happen, essentially?
Exactly. And you might have some control about that. You at least can ask and kind of get a lay of the land. And then moving on to our third column of the physical environment, there's a bunch of different factors. And again, acknowledging these is really what we're talking about here.
So there's the actual physical space itself. Do you know where you're going? Is this a place that you're going to have to ask directions on how to get to it? Is it a more formal space, or is it a more casual space?
And if you can visit the space ahead of time, for example, right, find out where the bathrooms are, where the entrances are, things like that, that can just relieve the pressure and give you that little bit more confidence.
There's also your attire. If you're someone that, for example, feels more confident in a suit, you're gonna want to wear a suit when you present. And conversely, if you're someone that feels more uncomfortable in a suit, you might want to see what you can do to either not present in a suit or find a way to make it more comfortable. I mean, it's even small things like wearing a pair of shoes that is comfortable and not going to hurt your feet.
Exactly. And physical comfort is a big deal. We tend to forget about that. But, are you dressed in a way that's, going to be okay with the temperature in the room? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Are your shoes too tight? Can you not breathe with the shirt and the tie combination you're wearing? Like all of these things play into physical comfort. And that's very much it can be an internal challenge as well. And then the last one in this category.
The tech. Every presenter's nightmare in many ways. Do you know what you're going to be using ahead of time? If this is like an in-person presentation, do you know if you're going to be connecting to a projector? Do you know if you have the cable you need to project? Are you going to be connecting wirelessly? Are you using your own devices, or are you borrowing someone else's? Do you have to send in your slideshow ahead of time? All of these things can complicate.
Exactly. And whilst that is all pretty specific to sort of presentations and meetings, in some forms tech can bite you in the most simple of ways, right? So, for example, walking into a venue, something I've done many times, trying to be terribly confident, and you push on the pull door. Right? Now, doors are pretty low tech, but that's all part of the physical environment that can just really mess with your confidence.
And finally, there's timing. And under that, we have things like prep time. Did you prepare adequately? Or did you perhaps maybe procrastinate and waste some of your prep time not preparing?
Yeah,
or
there's a reason that this is half yellow in this box, right? Because it is partially an internal challenge. And when you suffer from imposter syndrome, that can lead to excessive procrastination, right? That is a definite, clear side effect.
That being said, in terms of external challenges with prep time, also can be considered is, especially with presentations or meetings, is this something that your boss sprung up on you last minute? Sometimes you can control your prep time, but there are plenty of times where you cannot.
Yeah, so true story. When I first came to the US, I had a boss who was charitably, I would describe as difficult. And he comes into my office one morning and he said, "Oh, I need you to give a presentation to large company name because they invested $20 million in the company and they want to know what their money's achieved." And I didn't know this company was an investor. I didn't know we'd had an investment. It all happened before my time. And so, I was a little nervous about it. And I said, "Okay, when do you need it for?" And the guy looks at his watch and says, "In about an hour." And I wish I was kidding about that, but I wasn't. So, sometimes you don't have the prep time, but even just knowing that you didn't have the prep time, right, then maybe you can reduce some of the risks you're taking in your presentation and therefore bolster your confidence.
And then there's center of attention time. This, again, is quite specific to more presentations and meetings, but essentially, how long do you have to stand up with you being the only sole focus? Is this a sort of quick comment in a meeting, or is it a 30-minute presentation you need to give in front of a room full of people?
Yeah, so for example, if you were at a social event, right, if you have gotten dragged into a conversation, you can always leave the group, right? If you feel like you've done enough being the center of attention and you keep getting pulled back in, you can move to another group, right? That's a good reason to move along. And then last but not least is the sequence of events around you. This is particularly, again, for meetings and presentations, but what happened immediately before you and what's happening after you.
So I'm like, has someone done a super high energy presentation and you're about to sort of bring down that energy by talking about something necessary but less entertaining? Or conversely, are you walking into a very low energy room when you have a very high energy presentation?
Yep. You don't want to be the person talking about tax accounting if you're after the person that's been wrestling alligators for a living. And again, knowing that that's going to be the case can help you prepare. And I guess you could kind of in some ways sum all of this up with the very simplistic but quite popular
Fake it till you make it.
The title of our presentation. And so to wrap this up, we have some conclusions, some takeaways for you.
So the main thing is that imposter syndrome never really goes away, but it can be managed, especially if you analyze these things ahead of time and identify what you can control.
Yeah, use this as a checklist, identify what is going to be a stressor, what might be a trigger for your imposter syndrome, and do your best to control it or at least prepare for it ahead of time. And, of course, goes without saying, we're not mental health experts, and we reserve the right to retract this entire presentation if you all hate it, because we could be completely wrong.
See, previously mentioned imposter syndrome.
Thank you all for your time. We hope this has been a helpful presentation for you, and enjoy the rest of Mental Health 2024.